Hey everybody, my name is Tracy Brown. I'm the president of Diversity Trends, and I hope that you, like me, are excited to celebrate Diversity Awareness Month. And the month of October actually also happens to be the anniversary for Diversity Trends. So every year during October, we really try to be sure that we give you additional resources, both to celebrate the work you are doing in diversity and inclusion, and also to recognize that we've completed another year, trained a few thousand more people, provided additional resources. Since 1991, we've been helping clients move from bias to bridges, and we've provided training to more than 450,000 people now throughout the United States. Today, there's a question that we get to entertain, and that is the question of whether or not your diversity and inclusion strategy is business relevant. Can your strategy pass the business relevance test? We'll see. So, so hang with me, and in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to give you some good information, some good food for thought, and just some ideas for action. So let's switch over to the PowerPoint and follow along that way. The business side of inclusion is something that is not always really clear for everyone. And so it gives us the opportunity in this conversation to think about what really does that mean and how does it show up. So when I think about the business aspect of inclusion, with the basics, like, do you have a diversity and inclusion strategy? Well, you probably wouldn't be dialing in to listen to this if you didn't, but maybe you are just starting out. But my guess is if you're interested in this particular content, you already have a diversity and inclusion strategy. And what you want to do is to take a few minutes to see, is your inclusion strategy relevant? And what do I mean when I say, is it relevant? Do leaders in your organization consider your strategy as relevant to what they're doing and to what their needs are? Is it relevant to what the business of your organization is? So in less than 30 minutes, I have three objectives for our time together. One is that I'm going to share with you 5 questions that you can ask that will help you identify whether or not your strategy is business relevant. Number 2, I'm going to share with you a few red flags that you can pay attention to because they might be warning you that your strategy either is not business relevant or it's moving away from business relevance. And number 3, I'll give you some indicators that do represent business relevance. Organizations we've worked with around the United States that have really fabulous strategies. I'll share with you some of the indicators, some of the things that show up in their organization as a result of their strategy. So let's dive right in. We don't have a lot of time. What does it mean to pass the business relevance test? Well, it just simply means that leaders consider your efforts or the diversity and inclusion strategy efforts related to what they do as managers and leaders. They consider diversity and inclusion value added, that they can really see that value is being added by this attention to diversity and this commitment to inclusion. And it also means that your diversity and inclusion strategy is linked to service, linked to growth, linked to quality, linked to safety, linked to those things that are really important in your organization. And that diversity and inclusion is not seen as a standalone activity or project or problem that is an add-on to what's really important in the business. So what are some questions that you could ask that would help you assess whether or not your diversity and inclusion strategy is business relevant. The first question is related to the mission of the organization. How is the diversity and inclusion strategy directly related to why your organization exists in the first place? This is a really powerful question because if you don't have a link that your diversity and inclusion strategy is helping you achieve the mission of the organization, it's almost like you are completely wasting your time. And so you want to have that. This is the most obvious question that you could ask to test business relevance, but only one question won't give you the whole story. So the mission question really gets us in touch with why. Why is our diversity and inclusion strategy important? Because it links to the why of the organization. The second question relates to strategy. How does the diversity and inclusion strategy support what your organization has declared to be the most important goals to focus on now? So every organization has business priorities. They might be revised annually or every 3 years, or there may be a 5-year plan. But whatever the organization has declared as important, that drives what people do, what gets done, what projects get funded. And so your diversity and inclusion strategy must have a direct link to those things as well. So a second key question to ask is, how does the diversity and inclusion strategy support what the organization has declared to be the most important goals to focus on now? Question number 3 is a link to organizational values. Does your diversity and inclusion strategy align with your organization's standards for how people are treated? Now think about it. Mission relates to what? Like, or to why your organization even exists. Strategy relates to what gets done, what's important. And values relate to how. How do we work together? How do we represent the organization to the public? How do we engage with our customers, our patients? How do we deal with and interact with and behave with our vendors? So our values represent the how we show up. Let me give you an example. So often what happens is that our values have qualities and characteristics that we feel connected to. And so many organizations use respect, right, as one of their values. That might be true for your organization as well. So everyone says it's important to be respectful. But if no one is paying attention to diversity, they will assume everyone interprets or expects respect to be shown the same way they do. And in that scenario, a lot of times big mistakes are made because people interpret or have different standards for respect based on their culture, based on their age, based on their national origin and ethnicity. And so if you were developing a diversity and inclusion strategy that you wanted to tie into how people behave or what the values are of the organization, it would be a natural bridge to build, to have some cross-cultural communication built in, or modules on the different interpretations of respect based on culture. And then you would be able to say that our strategy is aligning with our standards for how people are to be treated. Another thing you want to focus on is the stakeholders. How have you defined within your diversity and inclusion strategy who is involved, who is engaged, who is consulted with, to ensure that key internal and external stakeholders are included at every level and in every place that relates to your diversity and inclusion strategy. It's so important that you really pay attention to the different stakeholders and how you engage them, how you engage different people in different ways. And when you have that built into your strategy, you'll find that people relate to the strategy more effectively. I was going to say more better. What That's like really not good English, is it? But relate to your strategy more effectively and can see how it will help them interact more effectively with their coworkers, with customers, with vendors, or if they're representing your organization out in the community, it's easier for them to make that link as well. And the fifth question is about metrics. It's where does our diversity and inclusion show up? Where is the accountability? Where are the indicators that this diversity and inclusion strategy actually is making a measurable contribution to the success of the organization? All of this is not simple. It's multi-layered. And that's why I said you can't answer these 5 questions alone and then feel like any one of them individually will give you the answer to whether or not your diversity and inclusion strategy is completely business relevant. But when you 5 of the questions together and you see where you have strengths and where you have opportunities to improve, that's when you start beginning to see where you are building into your strategy the things that are going to make the strategy relevant to folks throughout your organization who are running the business, who are dealing with the large number of employees or customers. And this is really how we begin to see that the relevance is a part of everything that is happening. This is where we begin to see that everything is working together and that your diversity and inclusion strategy is not something that is out there on its own or that people are seeing it as something added to their schedule. So when you have clear and concise answers to those 5 questions plus examples in at least 3 of the 5 categories, then you know that your strategy will pass the business relevance test. And what happens when that's going on is that you begin to see that the entire culture is growing into a culture where inclusion is valued. We have an ebook that's free for you to download that is directly related to the creating an inclusive culture. And you can go to diversity-strategy.com and click on the Diversity Month 2014 tab, and there will be a link there for you to download the culture, creating an inclusive culture ebook. But let's keep going. Let's go back into some of the things that are red flags for you. What are some of the things that could show up that would be red flags that maybe you should be taking a slightly different approach? That now is the time to really pay attention to what's going on. So maybe you find that you're still using affirmative action language. Affirmative action language might sound like, we value diversity in our company because it's important for us to have a workforce that represents the community where we're based. Now, that statement by itself is affirmative action based, because it's like, oh, there are 10% Latinos in our community, and so we should have 10% in our workforce. Or our community is 5% Black, so we should have 5% Black employees. And it's limited to numbers based. It's limited to certain categories, and it's measuring statistics that may or may not be relevant to the success of your business. Limited participation when you do sponsor events, or when you are promoting diversity and inclusion related activities in your organization, but you have really limited participation, or you find that it's time for the event and people are running around trying to drag people into the room, pull them away from their work. It's just a red flag that says maybe you haven't communicated or demonstrated that the content of your diversity and inclusion strategy is really relevant and directly related to people doing well in their jobs and having the company do well. A third possible red flag is a decline in volunteers. Recently, I was talking with a client organization, and about 5 years ago, they had an abundance of volunteers, employees who were really excited about creating programming and being engaged in dialogues and all of that. And when they called me because what they've noticed is that most of the people who volunteered 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, either have completely burnt out, or they have just gone on to other interests, and they haven't been able to replace those volunteers with new volunteers. So we ended up being in a conversation that led to some ahas about why people were no longer seeing this as valuable, and what they might be able to do organizationally to shift the swing back to engaging and enticing more people. Some additional things that could be red flags: if you have zero or a significant decrease in funding. And I'm really careful when I talk about funding, because a lot of times we think, oh, well, if this is an initiative and there's never any budget for it. That is a problem. If your strategy is truly business relevant, there is going to be some funding, because it's related to achieving the business goals. It's one of the reasons that's so important. But I also want to remind you that all the budgeting and all the funding that may be available may not be in one place. So it may not be in the budget of the diversity manager. It may be that training has some money budgeted because they're responsible for incorporating the sensitivity to diversity into leadership development, or into orientation, or into other training that they're doing. Your chief operations officer or your director of strategic planning might have some money in their budget or funding included as part of their budget, because if it's strategic planning, perhaps there are some resources that need to be provided to all leaders in the organization about how diversity can impact the strategic plan for their business unit. So that funding might be part of the strategic planning manager's budget versus in the HR department. So when I say that there's zero or decreased funding, I mean that the money is going away, even though wherever it may need to be in the organization. That's just one possible indicator that the reason, the rationale, and the value added of diversity and inclusion is not being understood by those who are making the decisions about funding and budgeting. If there's no senior leader, sponsor, or a senior leader who is a champion for your diversity and inclusion initiative, more than likely your initiative's not business relevant. These are just a few of some of the red flags. But what I really want to do is give you some ideas of things you can celebrate. Some of the things that show up as indicators of success, indicators that there is a link between business relevance and your commitment to diversity and inclusion. So let's hit a few of those. Senior leader engagement, it's one of them, yes, because senior leaders are tasked with the long-term strategy and the overall success of your organization. So when they actually get it, when they understand the connection between inclusion and business success, they're very engaged. They attend events, they volunteer to speak to whatever is going on in the organization and include a lens of diversity and inclusion. Number two, incorporation of diversity and inclusion in strategic planning. It's no surprise when it is so wrapped into the plans that key leaders are doing, and they are recognizing that, oh my goodness, if we want to increase market share by 15% over the next 3 years, we need to go out into communities we haven't accessed before. And that means we have to also understand if there are cultural norms that could affect how successful we are, or how much of our market we are able to penetrate. That kind of conversation as part of strategic planning and as part of the diversity and inclusion strategy, when those two things get married, oh my goodness, you just see all kinds of exciting things happen. A third key success indicator is when champions who are visible in your organization include straight white men. In so many organizations still in the 21st century, I'm shocked at how many organizations still are walking around and trying to convince people that they should pay attention to diversity because there are these 2 or 3 minority groups that haven't gotten a fair shake. That is something that has been true in the past. It's something that might still be true in some organizations today, but it's not the primary focus. If it is true in your organization, and it's important to have a focus on it, then you have to be really careful that you don't use that focus in a way that shames, blames, or causes fault on white men who are straight, because you'll exclude them. And you need everyone. You need people from every ethnicity, every gender, every sexual orientation, every aspect of your workforce to be engaged in diversity and inclusion. So in many organizations, when there's a large percentage of white men, whether they are in powerful leadership roles or just in individual contributor roles, it speaks to the strategy being successful when there are white men who are straight, who are also speaking up about the importance of diversity and how it helps them to be successful in the workplace. I'll hit a few more, and one is that there are diversity and inclusion modules in all behavior-related training. Excuse me. That whether it's from orientation when people are first coming into the organization and learning what is expected of them, all the way up to executive leadership training or succession planning and everything in between. Any class, any workshop, any advancement program that is related to managing or enhancing behavior must have a diversity and inclusion module in it. It must have something that helps people understand, how do I apply this behavioral skill when I am interacting with all different kinds of people? And I don't mean to imply that you would have a recipe booklet that would just really create stereotypes, but that people are encouraged and educated on how to adapt, how to recognize cues that mean that they may not be communicating effectively, and it might be culturally based. Operations leads and HR supports. This is something that has been showing up over and over again in those organizations that have really effective diversity strategies. The strategy may be monitored and administered by someone in HR, But often the folks who are viewed as the biggest champions are operations leaders, that the strategy is connected to what your organization's primary operations are all about. And that goes back to that very first question. What's our organization about? Why do we exist? And how does our diversity and inclusion strategy help us be that, help us do that? And then another success indicator to keep in mind and to consider is that you are observing that when people are not just saying they believe that diversity is important, but they're behaving in ways that demonstrate that. So a couple more, and then we'll move on. That activities are well attended, and activities that are a part of your diversity and inclusion strategy are perceived as activities or programs that add value. If you have awards and recognition programs that people are proud to be recognized as a champion for diversity and inclusion, and that your strategy and or your organization is viewed by others as a model or as a resource. One client I worked with, oh, it's been almost 10 years ago now. But as a part of that project, as a part of that assignment, we developed a strategy for developing diversity action plans at each entity or at each business unit. And that process grew, and that process was so well put together that it lasted in that organization for more than 10 years. And other organizations began to see this company as a leader and as a model. And so they've been asked many times to share their framework, to share their strategy, and to share the different parts of it that have helped them become recognized as a model, as an organization that's fully committed to diversity and inclusion. So when your organization begins to be recognized by others, especially in your industry or in your city or region, that's another indicator that your diversity and inclusion strategy more than likely is business relevant. And so the business side of inclusion is something that we all want to really pay attention to. And my question for you today is, what would indicate progress in your organization? As you begin to think about the 5 questions, and as you heard some of the red flags or the warning signs, where's your opportunity to grow? Where's your opportunity to progress? How do you help your people in your organization to be better champions for diversity and inclusion? One of the resources that we have available to you from Diversity Trends is a Diversity Champions Unleashed self-study course. It's a web-based course that you can take at your own pace, and that you can go through 27 different lessons in order to enhance your own skills as a diversity champion, or in order to have more information to share with others. And so it's resources like that and resources like this webinar that we love providing to you. So my objectives today were, in 30 minutes or less, to give you 5 questions that you could ask to do a self-assessment about whether or not your diversity and inclusion strategy is relevant. I wanted to share a few red flags that would be warning signs for you to really dig a little deeper and pay attention to what's going on. And I wanted to share some indicators of success that your diversity and inclusion strategy is business relevant. If you'd like to tap into any additional resources that we have available, please go to diversity-strategy.com and click on the Diversity Month 2014 link. You'll find links to this and other webinars, the ebook, which is free, and also a link to find out more information about the Diversity Champions Unleashed course. If there's any way at all that I can be a support to you or my team can help you achieve your diversity-related goals in the coming year, please contact us. There's information at diversity-strategy.com, or you can email staff at diversitytrends.com. Staff at diversitytrends.com, or go to diversity-strategy.com and go to the contact page. I would love to be a support to you. And since 1991, working with organizations all over the United States, it's been my honor and it's been a delight to be able to be part of the transformation of so many organizations. And I would love to be able to help your organization be be a proud owner of a diversity strategy, a diversity and inclusion strategy that is business relevant. My name is Tracy Brown from Diversity Trends. Bye for now.